Hey everyone, and welcome to Cozying Up with the Clear Cut, where we get up close and personal with women that inspire us. Today, we are sitting down with Emmanuella Asabor. She is a joint MD Candidate and Ph.D. student in Epidemiology at Yale University School of Medicine and Public Health, whose research sits at the intersection of social medicine, epidemiology, and health policy. Take a listen. Hey everyone, and welcome to Cozying Up with a Clear Cut, where we get up close and personal with women that inspire us. Today, I'm sitting down with Emmanuella Asabor. She is a joint MD Candidate and PhD student in Epidemiology at Yale University. We met in Africa, actually, a couple months ago in Botswana for the Forbes 30 Under 30 trip. And I was like, this woman is so impressive. We need to have her on our podcast. So I'm really excited to have you today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I have read your bio and it's extremely impressive, but I want to hear it from you. Like, what exactly are you studying? Do you do? And I know you were involved in a lot of stuff with COVID. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us kind of the work that you have been doing and how you got into it?
Sure. Yeah. So I am an MD PhD student. So I'm in medical school, but I'm also pursuing a PhD in a field that's related to my interest in medicine, but that's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's public health. And so I try to pay attention to the social factors outside of biomedicine that influence people's experiences with the healthcare system.
Right.
So I think about racism, I think about poverty, I think about gender, and how those forces shape someone's illness experience. Mm-hmm. So that's most of what I do. Mm-hmm. And some of the research that I've done with COVID in particular looked at how residential segregation really prevented access to COVID testing for a lot of populations that were particularly at risk for COVID infection. So that's like an example of the type of work I do, where I look at something that's sort of more of a sociological issue and think about how it influences healthcare.
Which is like super relevant these days.
Absolutely.
You're studying the right thing at the right time. So what experience sparked your interest in healthcare?
Sure. So I think, when I was younger, my parents are immigrants. And so I feel like there's sort of a list of careers that you hear, that your parents were
Doctor,
familiar
lawyer.
with. Exactly. Maybe engineer.
Yeah.
And so I think it was sort of floating around in my mind for a lot of my childhood. But I would say the experience that really kind of framed my desire to get a joint degree in particular probably came freshman year of college. I took a medical anthropology course, which was taught by somebody who was super prominent in the discipline. And I didn't know that at the time. I was 18, just newly in school and just excited to be there. And I remember my first day attending the class, he had a guest lecturer of somebody who was his former student, now a really dear colleague. And I thought that dynamic and that sort of mentorship dynamic was really cool. And so that sort of picture of what academia could be like was really cool. And also it was the first time that I heard anyone speak about the social influences of health in a structured academic way. Mm-hmm. I had thought about science and science equals health, basically. Right. And that was kind of all I knew. But that moment really opened my eyes to the structured and intentional study of all of these other factors that shape healthcare. And those ended up being the factors that I was most interested in and most passionate about. So I would say that course experience was really eye-opening for me. And I think from then on, and also both of those professors were MD PhDs. And so I think from then on, I was I want to be exactly like them. So I signed up for the program.
What are some challenges you faced while working on your PhD?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned now that my work is really timely, and I think that's true. And I think that before 2020, it was a little bit more difficult to get some of the more traditional folks in my department on board with some of my interests. Mm-hmm. My department is pretty sort of pretty quantitative and pretty kind of traditional field epidemiology. That's sort of what dominates. And my interests are a little bit different. I do some quantitative work, but I also do qualitative work. So I do a lot of mixed methods. And so my approach to questions and some of the things that I was most interested in were different from a lot of the other doctoral students in my department and from a lot of what the other sort of professors in my department were primarily interested in. So I think it took a while to sort of bring people on board to like why this particular approach made sense for the study of infectious diseases. So I think that was a challenge, sort of trying to like build that support network. And I think what ended up working really well for me was not limiting myself to my department. And so I, would build relationships with faculty within the School of Public Health, but in different departments. I would build relationships with people outside of the School of Public Health entirely, even from other institutions. I have lots of really great mentors from Penn and Harvard, where I was an undergrad, and I sort of rekindled those relationships. And I found that really helped me get some perspective from people who could sort of help me kind of make my ideas better.
Mm-hmm. So what were like some of the findings like in COVID that had to deal with more of like a public health kind of
perspective? Yeah. So I think the primary thing that I found was if you look at, I had this like really striking finding in Chicago, for example, which by like most measures is the most segregated city in the US. And I created these maps to sort of illustrate some of what I was studying. And if you take Chicago and you map on racial groups in Chicago, the availability of testing sites mapped on almost exactly to like where different racial groups were situated. So in the parts of Chicago that were like mostly Black, there were like 0 testing sites in most of those areas. And so I think seeing that like really striking visual representation and then seeing some of these challenges sort of repeat themselves when it came time for kind of COVID vaccine access. And even now with like monkeypox, people are thinking about how do we like...
Monkeypox now.
It's terrifying.
What do we do? We're still not over COVID yet.
I know. I think what's really... I was listening to... someone who actually studies monkeypox talk about how like all of like the situation that we're in was completely preventable.
Okay.
And it's really...
I feel like all situations have been preventable.
And what she pointed to I thought was so interesting. She said that there's this fundamental thing about America where the states are sort of allowed to do their own thing and the sort of federal government is sort of its own entity. And the extent to which they interact is limited by like the literal fabric of our country, right? And that some of the issues with monkeypox had to do with sort of a disconnect between a state public health agenda and a federal public health agenda. So like, I don't know what the solution to that is because that seems just so fundamental to the way that we like conceive of American democracy. So clearly we need some like major public health.
Well, that's kind of how it was. We're like New York, we were like locked down and like couldn't leave our houses. But my family in Florida were like running wild, like doing whatever they wanted.
Like day and night.
I was like, aren't we in like a pandemic? Like, why am I locked in? Maybe I could just fly to Florida and then like live a totally normal life.
Yeah. It's like a completely different world.
Yeah.
Right?
And that doesn't like, I don't know. It just makes no sense.
It doesn't. I think that for public health emergencies, we need something like more coordinated for sure. And
do we have to be nervous about monkeypox?
So,
yes.
So I think that right now,
we have a vaccine though, right?
We do have a vaccine. And we actually have a generous supply of not only vaccine, but also a drug that actually treats monkeypox.
Okay,
so once people
good.
get monkeypox, so that's great. That's positive. The con is a lot of people who aren't super seriously ill are having trouble accessing treatment because it's necessarily prioritizing folks who are more seriously ill, are immunocompromised, et cetera. And so...
Are we seeing racial discrepancies with the monkeypox
I have not
vaccine?
studied that. That's a great question. I have not studied that. I read a New York Times article that said that the distribution in New York seemed to be really limited. And that there was a possibility for some socioeconomic barriers in accessing the vaccine for monkeypox. But I haven't looked at it systematically. But it wouldn't surprise me if there were, right? Because I think a lot of what I've seen in my work has not been particular to COVID or particular to kind of any disease area. I've studied, HIV. I've done some work on police violence as well. And I think what I've seen is that when there are
interesting.
yeah, I'm happy to talk more about that too. But I think what you see are these kind of long-standing and like deeply embedded structural barriers. And so what happens is if you don't address the underlying structural barriers, whenever there's another health issue, another global emergency, you're going to see inequities. And so I think that's really, if I could have like one takeaway, that would be the takeaway, is like just, I think, embracing our connectedness and really trying to build a more equitable world in general will help like really make sure that these like global health emergencies and the next random like weird virus doesn't become, as catastrophic as COVID was.
So basically what you're saying is that, structures that we have in our like society can lead to like diseases.
Absolutely.
So can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure.
That's so interesting.
Okay, yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about some work that I did in South Africa in terms of HIV prevention. So I went in, not really sure what I would find. I was really doing an open-ended study, so more qualitative and just trying to be open to what people in the community that I was spending time with thought about HIV in their community. And I remember when I came back to sort of analyze my data and prepare my findings for sharing, that there are themes that came up with almost all of the people that I interviewed. And people would talk over and over and over about transportation barriers, lack of employment, all of these like non-health factors, right? Like they're not things that we maybe automatically think of when we think about HIV and disease.
Right.
But people were basically pointing to the fact that they lived in this rural community that is a consequence of really, post-apartheid realities in South Africa. And those kind of structural barriers, those economic barriers were really affecting their ability to access care. And so all of my findings, all of my results really pointed to social factors. I spoke really, really little about some of the kind of behavioral or kind of biological issues that you might expect when thinking about HIV. And so that's a theme that's come up over and over and over in the kind of work that I've done.
How does that relate to, you mentioned like police, what did you say? Police violence, like here in the US?
Yeah, so basically what I've done with police violence is I've tried to take the tools that I've learned from studying infectious diseases and public health and applied that to thinking about police violence. And what me and my colleagues found was that despite years of like body cams and like sort of incremental local kind of agency specific changes in our approach to policing in the country, that racial disparities and fatal police violence have not actually changed all that much. And so I think it's similar to some of the challenges that we discussed with COVID, right? That like it might be time for a more like coordinated kind of nationwide approach to addressing some of these issues, because some of the smaller really local and agency-specific changes haven't really made a difference for the people that are really suffering the most from this issue.
Do you think like it's realistic that we're gonna get together and make these big changes?
That is a great question. That is a great question.
Because I think like the problem is apparent, and we like, I don't even know, like gun violence is also something like similar. It's kind of like an epidemic of its own. But
I agree,
like,
completely.
And everyone's like, oh yeah, these are problems, but no one's really like coming together.
I feel like every time there's something high profile in the news, people really get upset, and then the enthusiasm just fizzles out.
And something else comes.
Right. And something else takes our attention, right? So I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes I'm more optimistic than others, to be completely honest. I think it's tough. What I will say though is I think that in the past like 2 years, I feel like it's been different. Like, I feel like the past 2 years have been, it feels like the momentum has been more sustained in terms of people like keeping these kinds of issues.
Or they've at least been acknowledged.
More so than in the past, right?
Right.
Like, that's the way it feels to me when I've thought about these like cycles of like attention to these issues and then kind of that attention fading out. It does feel like these past 2 years have been different, and like the attention has been more sustained and more mainstream also, right? Like, I feel like I'm having some of these conversations with like very different groups of people, and I don't know if that was true kind of prior to 2020.
Right.
Hey everyone, Olivia here. Hope you're enjoying our episode. Our Clear Cut collection features fine jewelry pieces inspired and designed with you in mind. Our collection is ever-changing, and each piece is handmade and made to order here in New York City. Don't forget to check it out and use the code COZY, C-O-Z-Y, for free shipping on any purchase.
What are some major like misconceptions you've uncovered through your research?
This might be a misconception that I'm not sure the extent to which this is held by like people at large, or if this is something that's like super specific to like, you know, people in public health or like people in medicine. But I do feel like there's this hierarchy between like quantitative data and like number crunching, and then more like experiential data and like sitting down with someone and hearing about their life experience. And I found that hierarchy to be completely false. I found that those two like forms of information gathering work really well together, and some of the work that I'm proudest of has integrated those two forms of data gathering. I'm not sure if that's something that like most people care about, but it's definitely something that comes up in my training a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. What are some goals you hope to reach like through your research?
Yeah, so I think that I have never been like super interested in like one specific disease area. For me, it's always been like, what does this like studying this disease show me or kind of teach me about society at large?
Right.
That's been my approach. And, you know, I'm nearing the end of my MD Ph.D. program, slowly but surely. And I'm starting to think about residency and kind of what specific area of medicine I'm most interested in. And so I think moving forward, I'd love to try to apply some of what I've learned in my studies so far to questions in the realm of dermatology. I'm really, really passionate and interested about how we can think about kind of equitable representation in a field like dermatology, and trying to combine my my like interest in making sure everyone feels seen in a clinical encounter with the world of like skin and hair. And so yeah, I think that's probably what I'd like to do next, is think about questions specifically in the realm of dermatology.
That's cool. Awesome. So, but you mentioned also like we kind of want to take away like what like a disease or something says about like society at large. Curious what you think like COVID says about our society at large.
Oh wow. Yeah, I think COVID says a lot of things.
Yeah, a lot of things.
COVID says a lot of things. I think so I found COVID to be at times just like deeply, deeply embarrassing as somebody who was part of the healthcare community, right? Yeah. Like, we had instances in the United States where there were physicians having to try to make a decision between two patients and who got a ventilator. In a country like the US, there's just no excuse for that. We have to like get it together.
Right.
So I think that
didn't we let like all of these people off of a cruise ship to fly like on airplanes
that
everywhere?
Also did not make any sense.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's something that's like old school public health knowledge.
Yeah.
Like, we knew better,
not to do
right?
that. Yeah.
Exactly. And we like did it anyway. And so I think COVID just exposed a lot of like,
we wore gloves but like would not wear masks. Yeah. It was crazy times.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so I think COVID said a lot. I think it exposed a lot of kind of weak points. I think there's a lot of like really cool stuff happening in healthcare in the US. There's a ton of innovation. There's so much creativity. But I think that we sometimes like don't do enough to invest in the basics. of like just public health, like basic public health principles that can really keep people healthy and safe. And so I think COVID just exposed like all of those weaknesses that in a country like the United States, we're making those kinds of triage decisions, I think is really sad. And I think the result was a lot of unnecessary loss of life ultimately. Like, right. I think, and that's like super, super sad, you know? I think that, yes, I think any like loss of life or suffering that can be prevented, we should be trying to prevent, right? So I think that's like, for me, that's like the biggest thing that COVID exposed. And I think it also just exposed a lot of our like interconnectedness, right? Like I think with the respiratory disease, it's not the sort of thing that like this group of people over here can be suffering from and it doesn't affect everybody else. That's just like not the way it works with something right. that's highly contagious and respiratory. And so I think it forced us to just like recognize how like deeply connected we are, not just in the US, but also globally, yeah. And to like really bear that in mind in the way that we think about what's worth kind of investing in moving forward.
Yeah, totally. What advice would you give for, you know, a young woman kind of wanting to follow in your footsteps or pursue a career in like academia or healthcare?
That's so interesting because I think right now I'm very ambivalent so I'm deeply passionate about healthcare. I will always be doing something in healthcare. I am still taking my time trying to decide if I want to be sort of a traditional strict academic, to be completely honest. I think there's so many different ways to potentially make impact and sort of use my training to make impact. So, I'm still figuring that part out. But in terms of advice, I think the most important advice that I've gotten that I've held really dear is someone told me early on in med school to write a mission statement for myself and to update that mission statement every year. And as I considered opportunities and commitments and tried to juggle things as I got busier, to sort of refer back to that mission statement as like a guiding light, so that I made sure that I was taking on things that were really aligned with my core values and whatever I felt like was my mission for that year or that season in my life. And so I would really encourage people to do that, just to be like really explicit about what's important to you, write it down and use that to make sure that your efforts are really aligned with whatever your vision is. And I think the second piece of advice is to be like shameless about seeking out mentorship. I think mentorship has been like crucial for me, and different kinds of mentors for different things. Mentors that helped me understand things that made me feel more technically proficient, but also mentors in terms of the kind of person I want to be, and the kind of impact I want to have on my patients, and to see people who interact with their patients in a way that like really inspires me. So I would say definitely at like every stage, seeking out someone who has, had some success in whatever it is that you're interested in. I would definitely recommend that. I think that's crucial for academia, for healthcare, and probably for other fields as well.
How do you like get a mentor? Are you like, hey, do you want to be my mentor? Or like,
That's a great question. So I've done a variety of things. I think on occasion I have cold emailed people like,
hey, I like you. Do you want to be my mentor?
Yes. But I think that works in academia and in healthcare. There's a culture that sort of expects that a little bit, especially if you're a student. I think that you can get away with almost anything as a student if you just like play the student card. I'm a student at XYZ place. I'm really interested in your research, or I'm really interested in what seems to be your clinical specialty. And I would recommend, this is super, super specific for health and medicine, and academia, but I would recommend reading some of someone's research, at least the abstract, have a sense of what they do, and reference like a recent publication in your outreach email and say, I just read you just recently published in this area. I just so happen to be super interested in that area. And use that as like a jumping off point. And I found that like 80% of the time people get back to you. And so, I would not be afraid to like, just go for it. I feel like that's how I found a lot of my, at least my like technical mentors.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, just because we're a jewelry company. So we have to talk a little bit about jewelry.
Yeah.
But one of our favorite things about jewelry is that they can have like special sentimental meaning, or they can be passed down. Do you have any like pieces in your collection that you particularly love or have like emotional connection to?
Yes. So I have like pieces of gold in particular. I have rings and bracelets that my grandmother basically melted down some of her jewelry to make things for her grandchildren. And so my mom let me know this like story behind the jewelry. And so I immigrated to the US, and so I didn't really get a chance to grow up with a ton of my extended family. So I think that—
Where are they?
Mostly in Nigeria and also in the UK.
Okay.
And so I think that jewelry was a form of like special connectedness, especially for people that I like couldn't see super frequently.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most sentimental jewelry that I have. And I want to do something similar. You know, if I have daughters, like I definitely want to, you know, give them something that's like a piece of something that I would wear directly. So yeah.
Awesome. So what's next for you? Dermatology?
Yes,
Yeah.
Hopefully.
So you're gonna go into like healthcare, being a physician? Or?
Yeah, so I think that's what I'm trying to figure out, like what is this mix gonna be for me?
Right.
I definitely want to spend at least part of my time directly taking care of patients, ideally in a dermatology setting. Like I would love to do that. And I'm still trying to figure out kind of how I'll spend the rest of my time, because I know I don't want to be 100% clinical. Recently I started, I've developed an interest in medical technology and innovation, and sort of trying to, again, kind of apply that equity lens to thinking about how we can create technological solutions in derm and in other areas that work well for everyone, right? And so that's a space that I'm really interested in as well.
I feel like if you want a side gig, you can also be a really great like commentator on the news.
I would love that. My dream job is just to be like the CNN.
This is what is it, Sanjay Gupta? Like, this is our medical specialist.
I would so love that.
I feel like you could totally do that. You're totally qualified for that.
I would love Sanjay Gupta's job. If anyone would like to hook me up, like let me know. So yeah, I don't know exactly what form things will take. I know that I'm interested in equity and making things accessible and making everyone feel seen. And I know I'm really passionate about dermatology and thinking about skin and hair and how to kind of bring as much innovation and like thoughtful thinking to that space. But beyond that, I'm honestly not sure.
Would you ever go into like a government position?
I have thought about it. I think
the social changes.
I know. To explore the political route to social change. I'm definitely open. I'm not saying no to anything. I'm not saying no to virtually anything.
A lot of roots and a bright future.
So I've definitely considered it. I did a little bit of policy work with the New York State Department of Health before starting med school, and that was super, super interesting. I also think government is very slow moving.
Yes.
And so I think you have to have, like, to be effective in that setting, you have to have a certain sort of patience and temperament.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm still very undecided, as you can tell. I'm interested in so many different things. But what I know for sure is I'm definitely going to be trying to do what I can to make dermatological care as accessible as possible. And then beyond that, we'll see.
Amazing. And if someone wants you to be their mentor, where should they cold email you?
Yes, they can definitely cold email me at myfirstname.mylastname@yale.edu.
Amazing.
I just did a mentorship event yesterday. So I'm like, mentorship is super important to me. So if I can connect you to something or be helpful, I'm happy to.
Amazing. Well, this was so interesting and so much fun. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Wow, that was such an interesting conversation. I really love sitting down with Emmanuella and learning more about how our public policy can really influence our healthcare system. I hope you guys took away as much as I did from that really insightful conversation.